Fungi Part 2, Classification of Fungi. There are two types of classifications of fungi which are used. One is taxonomical classification and one is morphological classification. In both the classifications, fungi are divided into four categories. Let us first have a look at the taxonomical classification. In the taxonomical classification, fungi are divided into four phyla: Zygomycota, Escobacota, Basilio Mycota and Mycota. And each of these four phyla, they have one class each. Zygomycota have Zygomycetes, Escomycota have Ascomycetes, Basilio Mycota have Basidiomycetes and Mycota have Deuteromycetes. So there are four classes in taxonomical classification of fungi. Now let us have a look at each of these individually. The first phylum Zygomycota, the name is derived from the word zygote, which means fertilized egg. The Zygomycota fungi, they are mostly decomposers. They are found in the soil. Example of Zygomycota include Rhizopus Fungus. Rhizopus Fungus is known as bread mold because it grows in the bread. You can see this photograph of a bread in which fungi have grown. This is typically an appearance of Zygomycetes fungi growing in the bread, commonly the Rhizopus fungus growing, known as bread mold. In Zygomycota, the fungal mass of the hyphae, known as the Mycelium, penetrates the bread and produces the fruiting bodies on top of the stalks. Means there is one portion of the fungus which is above the surface of the bread and one portion which is below the surface of the bread. The surface which is above the surface of the bread is known as the aerial portion, and the portion which is below the surface of the bread is known as the vegetative portion. The aerial portion will have lots of spores, and these spores, they can spread in the environment in the surrounding areas, and thus the fungi can spread very fast because of the spores. While the vegetative portion, it derives nutrition, it is responsible for deriving nutrition from the medium in which it is growing. Now there are several hyphae which are growing in the fungi. Now hyphae means a filamentous portion. A filamentous growth of fungus is known as hyphae. Singular is hypha and plural is hyphae. And a mass of hyphae, an entangled mass of hyphae is known as mycelium, right? So mycelium can be seen in case of Zygomycota. And the spores are seen in the aerial portion. These spores, they can spread by airborne route, and they can lead to a very fast spread of the fungus. Hence you can see that when this fungus start growing in the bread, in just a single day, lot of the entire surface of the bread becomes covered by fungus, because by the means of the spores, aerial spores, the fungus is spreading in the entire bread. The second category is Escobacota. Escus means cup. So they have cup-shaped reproductive structures, so they are known as Escobacota. Example, baker's yeast, brewer's yeast and cup fungi. There are some photographs of Escobacota shown here. They have cup-shaped reproductive structures. These are cup fungi. The third category is Basilio Mycota. Basilio Mycota are also known as club fungi because Basidium means club. They have club-shaped reproductive structures, and many common examples of Basilio Mycota include mushrooms, puffballs and shelf fungi. And these are some photographs: mushrooms, puffballs and shelf fungi. These are some mushrooms. They have basidium which is a club-shaped structure, and from this basidium several spores are generated which can spread by the aerial route in the surrounding environment and lead to spread of the fungus. Now there are several edible mushrooms which are also used, they fall in the category of Basilio Mycota, like these edible mushrooms which are used in the pizza, etc. So these are some photographs of edible mushrooms which are used for consumption as food. In the basidium, there are lots of spores. They are attached in the basidium in the club shape, and by the aerial route the spores they can spread from one area to another area. So this basidium, the fruiting body, is responsible for the spread of the fungus in the surrounding environment. The fourth category is Deuteromycota. The Deuteromycota, they are known as imperfect fungi, regarded as imperfect fungi because no sexual stage is known in their life cycle. Members are not closely related and are not necessarily similar in structure or appearance. They do not share a common ancestry. So it is a heterogeneous group of fungi which do not have a sexual stage, or their sexual stage is not yet known to us. And all these fungi, they are known as imperfect fungi or Deuteromycota, and they all fall in this one group known as Deuteromycota. Then comes the morphological classification of fungi. In morphological classification of fungi, there are 4 categories also, like the taxonomical classification, which also had 4 categories. The first is yeast, second is yeast-like fungi, the third is molds or filamentous fungi or mycelial fungi, and the fourth are dimorphic fungi. Now the description. Yeast are round or oval unicellular fungi which reproduce by budding or binary fission. Example, Cryptococcus. So Cryptococcus is the only yeast known to us which infects human beings. So remember, example in yeast is Cryptococcus neoformans. Then second category is yeast-like fungi. Some yeast, they grow partially as yeast and partially as chains of elongated budding cells joined end to end, forming pseudohyphae and pseudomycelia. These yeast-like fungi, they form pseudohyphae and pseudomycelia. An example of yeast-like fungi include Candida. So yeast में के एग्जाम्पल में आएगा क्रिप्टोकोकस और yeast like fungi के एग्जाम्पल में आएगा कैंडिडा. कैंडिडा में pseudohyphae और pseudomycelium formation होता है. Now these are several terms. The third category is filamentous fungi. The filamentous fungi or molds, they grow as multicellular branching filaments. In that several terms are there. The hypha, what is hypha? Hypha is a filament of fungus. Each filament is known as a single hypha, and several hypha together they are known as hyphae. Then a mass of entangled hyphae is known as a mycelium, and several mycelia, plural is mycelia and singular is mycelium. The main body of fungus from which the hyphae arise is known as Phthalus Septa. There can be transverse walls dividing the hyphae at irregular intervals. They are known as septa. The septate hyphae are morphologically single units because the septae do not differentiate them into separate units, and there is free flow of nuclei and other cytoplasmic material through the septa. And there are 2 types of mycelium, aerial mycelium and vegetative mycelium. The part of mycelium projecting above the culture medium is known as aerial mycelium, and the part of the mycelium growing in the culture medium is known as vegetative mycelium. Here you can see in the figure, some mycelium are growing above the surface of the medium, that they are the aerial mycelium, and some mycelium growing inside the surface, they are known as vegetative mycelium. There is abundant formation of spores on aerial mycelium that affects their airborne transmission. Now examples of filamentous fungi or molds include Aspergillus, dermatophytes, Zygomycetes, Penicillium, etc. The fourth category is dimorphic fungi. Dimorphic fungi, they exist as both yeast form and as filamentous form depending upon the condition of growth. The yeast form occurs in the host tissues and in the cultures at 37 degrees Celsius, and the filamentous form or the saprophytic phase occurs in the soil and in the cultures at about 22 to 25 degrees Celsius. So the same fungus can appear in 2 morphological forms at 2 different temperatures. Yeast form at 37 degrees Celsius and inside the host, and filamentous form at 22 to 25 degrees Celsius and in the natural environment. The yeast form is known as the parasitic phase and the filamentous form is known as the saprophytic phase. Examples of fungi responsible for systemic mycosis like Histoplasma, Blastomyces, Coccidioides and Paracoccidioides. These are all examples of dimorphic fungi. These are several fungal structures. The variety of structures as observed in fungi. These are 2 photographs. One shows septate mycelium, in which hyphae they are septate, and one shows mycelium which is non-septate, in which the hyphae they do not have septa. So they are aseptate hyphae forming an aseptate mycelium. This completes the part 2, that is classification of fungi. Thank you.